Hi, everyone. Welcome to our keynote session of the Stronger Together event. We're so glad that you're joining us, and we are honored to have world-renowned ecologist, author, and conservationalist Carl Safina joining us today. For any of you who may be unfamiliar, you can find out more about Carl and his work at carlsafina.org or his conservation and environmental not-for-profit, which is safinacenter.org. Carl's most recent book, Becoming Wild: How Animal Cultures Raise Families, Create Beauty, and Achieve Peace, will be a topic for discussion with our very own Julianne Lee in today's keynote. It's called Positive Environmental Impacts and Beyond. I couldn't be more excited. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And without further ado, please let me introduce Carl and Julianne Lee.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Okay. Hi, Carl.
Hey.
So it's been a pretty amazing event, and I wish that I had like a week to talk to you and a week to put your wisdom out there. And I don't know how I'm going to do this in an hour, but we'll get through it. Before I've been sort of talking about you last night at the kickoff, but I think what your book and the reason that I'm talking about the book so much is because it's probably been one of the most profound books I've ever read in my whole life.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. And I don't want to cry. Oh, I'm so emotional. It's ridiculous. And I just wish, I said to my team that I wish so much that it could be not only required reading, but possibly, for preschoolers and things like that, that they could hear it as a story sort of at the beginning of every class. And I think the reason that I think it's so important is because the whole event today, we have been gracious enough to be practitioners that work with natural substances and been able to, find a way with our gifts and our interest in nature to help animals and people. We had human naturopathic doctors and homeopaths and stuff on today as well. And I feel like I'm so glad we're doing this right now, because I feel like we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for nature. We wouldn't have this event. We wouldn't be able to help people. And the event has been so that we can try and give back to people. And I believe that the wisdom that comes from your books, it just, like, my heart explodes when I read some of it. And I feel like why it does is because we're going through such a hard time right now, that when I read passages, it just makes me hopeful, right? It just really makes me feel so hopeful. And what makes it also makes me feel grounded, because it's millions of years old. It's not something new. And it's something that everybody that spoke today, we all have that affinity to nature. So a few of my goals for the event was to help with stress and COVID. And I want to talk with you today about how I can't help but feel that we've just gone through sort of an unprecedented opportunity to see empirically how resilient nature is in such a short period of time with pollution and endangered species. I can't help but feel and see that nature is trying to help us get through this. And what I wanted to say is that I feel like when I read your book, it's going to help us not just get through it and survive the pandemic, but get through it with a much healthier, deeper, more connected, loving world. So I hope everybody can read it because it's really profound. And when we talked about how we were going to do this, yesterday I sent you some passages, and I'm hoping that you can read those passages to us, and then I can ask questions, and we can just go from there.
Right. Okay. Well, I actually chose a couple of different passages.
Oh, good. No, that's awesome. That's great. I'm glad.
So let me just reiterate that this book is called Becoming Wild, and it's mostly about culture in non-human animals. But since humans are animals, culture in humans is very similar to, well, I should say what culture is in humans is very similar to what culture is in other animals. But how culture is in humans is very different. We have human culture. Other animals have the culture of their particular species in their particular place. Now, I guess before I read, let me say what culture is so we kind of have an understanding of what we're talking about. Culture is the behaviors, the habits, and even the attractions that are passed along socially. They're entirely learned, although our genes give us a capacity for what we learn, and this is true of different animals. A humpback whale has the capacity to learn different songs of humpback whales. Humans have the capacity to learn different human languages. That's genetic, but what human language we learn is completely cultural, okay? So why is there culture? Well, culture answers the question of how do we live here where we live? And this is true for humans, and this is true for many other animals. Many social animals have culture. Many animals are not very social and don't have culture, so it's not a universal thing. But for those animals that live in social groups, they mostly have something that they need to learn. You could imagine this most, most sharply by imagining a chimpanzee that's raised in captivity and then is driven to the edge of a forest and somebody opens the crate. That chimpanzee is doomed. It doesn't have the culture. It's not part of the local community, and it will die. So that's the importance of culture. But it's the same with humans as well. If we grew up in the Arctic, we would learn from our elders, from our parents, an Arctic culture. If we grew up in the Amazon rainforest, we would learn how to live there. But even though any of us could have learned those things, if you don't know how to live there, you won't be able to survive there. Okay, so this is the way culture works for many kinds of species. A weird thing about culture is that culture relies on innovation because all culture is copying. In a sense, you could say all culture is appropriated, but culture ingrains conservative behavior. Once the way we do things is learned, doing things a different way is resisted. And this is true not only in humans, but in other animals as well. That's partly because what works has been proven to be safe. We know it works. If you rock the boat, if you try something else, it might not work. If you learn what foods in the forest are safe, it doesn't really pay to be trying all kinds of things because you might get poisoned. So a weird thing is that culture relies on innovation, but innovation and nonconformity are resisted. And this is very true with humans as well. Nonconformists often have a very hard time in culture. And we, as many other animals, have this saying, when in Rome, do what the Romans do. If you're in a place where the culture is a certain way, do things that way. If you can imagine I guess to make another sort of a sharp example, religions are cultural. And if you go and worship with your religion and everybody from your religion, you all know what to do. You all know what to expect from the service. You all know that you all believe the same way. But imagine if you went to a service where everybody was from different religions and they expected a service for their religion. It wouldn't work. That's the way it is with other animals as well. So you have things like sperm whales, which is one of the examples in my book. The different sperm whale cultures, they travel differently, they hunt differently. This is true of other dolphins. This kind of thing is true of apes. It's true of birds. It's true of many other kinds of animals that know, for instance, where do we migrate when the weather turns cold? If you live in the Rockies, you need to know where the winter range is. You have to know that based on somebody teaching you that, based on your social group teaching you that. So it's very much a when in Rome thing. When birds that have a certain song dialect move into a different area with a different song dialect, they tend to adopt the local song dialect rather than insisting on bringing the one that they learned. Similar thing is true of chimpanzees. Chimpanzees move into a different community. They don't bring the kind of culture that they grew up with. They learn the culture they've moved into. And humans do this as well. People may move from a place like Eastern Europe to the United States. They want to learn how to cook a Thanksgiving dinner. Okay, so those are the kinds of things that we see with humans and the parallels. What does culture do? It makes individuals clump together into groups. And by clumping together into groups, it enhances the specialization of those groups. How you eat, what is food. In humans, it's things like how you pray or how you play a game. We have lots of ways of flagging different cultures. We have religious symbols, we have team insignias, military uniforms, flags, those kinds of things. So you get into a group, you have a group identity, you can get deeper into the specialization of that group, but then another thing happens, and that is that groups tend to avoid or repel or even fight other cultural groups. And all of the turmoil that we have right now in the United States and elsewhere, for instance, has to do with this terrible and really arbitrary aspect of culture. Who you learn is in your group and who you learn is outside your group. What you learn could be completely different. You could learn that anybody in your country is in your group, or anybody who speaks your language is in your group, but that's not necessarily the way we tend to do it. We could have a culture that's much more embracing, but as we see with these other animals, it doesn't tend to work that way. That's not why we have culture. It's not to celebrate diversity. Humans have a need to celebrate diversity because we're all jumbled up together now for the first time in history. So we have a terrible need to get along, because without getting along, we just create misery for each other. But for most of history, for most animals and for most of human history, when we lived in little tribal groups, the idea of culture was to learn how we do things and to stick to that. So, all right, with that fairly lengthy introduction, I'm going to read something from the book, and this is about sperm whales. The book has 3 animals that I use as main examples: sperm whales, scarlet macaws, and chimpanzees. So with the sperm whales, I went out with some researchers in the Caribbean, and we were looking for the whales by listening for them, dropping a microphone into the water and listening for them. They make the loudest sounds in nature. You can hear them from about 3 miles away. And they stay underwater about 50 minutes out of every hour, because sperm whales hunt about 2,000 to 3,000 feet down, where there's no light at all. It's frigid. And the reason that they have the culture they do is that their babies cannot go down there following their mother. They're not capable of doing that. and they're helpless at the surface. So they need babysitters. So sperm whales have a babysitter culture where all the females live together, an older female with her sisters and all their daughters and their babies. And when mothers are down, aunts or cousins are babysitting for the helpless baby at the surface. So, okay, let's go look for some sperm whales in the Caribbean. After some interval that I am not closely keeping, our boat is undulating across the massage of long swells. We transit in and out of the company of flying fish, of terns. The sea, glittering, rolls like a carpet of short blue flames. We travel in small ecstatic sparks of time. The blue-gray sea is slick and hazy bright. It is both eternal and instantaneous, and the whales that this ocean has brought forth seem, in their pacing and their scale, to reflect the enormity of all things past and present. Something like time must be passing, but I feel suspended in an infinite moment that seems to vibrate in place. Perhaps from the whales I have learned something about living. One whale stops hunting. Her clicks silence. Over the next few minutes, others also silence their sonars. They're coming up, up, up. A few minutes later, the dark heads and backs of two whales shatter the harsh sparkle of the sea like tiny newborn islands, the coastline of their bodies generating their own surf. Their white puffs drift on the distance. Three others burst the surface, so a total of 5 up now. And what I'm left with is this impression. A whale is too big to see. At a time you get pieces, now the head, now the back, now the flukes, never the whale. In Rome once, I said to my wife, Patricia, we've now seen Michelangelo's painting of the Creator. But what would the Creator's own painting of creation look like? I think that's easy to answer now. It is these whales in this sea. She's just focused her sonar on us, says Shane. Shane is the scientist I'm with, still listening in his headphones. Now she's traveling down. Focus sonar comes in very fast strings of clicks that are called click trains, sometimes more than 600 clicks per second, and they sound to us like a buzz. When they all dive, I put on the headphones and am amazed at how loud they are, clicking out their clacking codes of recognition, braiding their messages of bonding and belonging. Their sound, highly stylized, is percussive and precise like castanets. As I listen, the codes go in and out of phase with each other. Sometimes they're perfectly separated, sometimes they completely overlap, like conversations at a busy table. For a couple of minutes, I listen to their affirmations, these short repeated code words, and then the rally subsides and they switch to the business of searching, and their echolocation clicks begin coming into my ears. Tick, tick, tick. With time now for a break, most of our crew takes the opportunity to jump into the water. Put your head under, you can hear the whales. Vibrating an enormous sphere of water around them, they sound saturate the ocean as they level off perhaps 1,000 meters down. Journalist James Nestor got eye-to-eye with sperm whales in the Indian Ocean and noted, I heard a thunderous crack, then another, so loud they vibrated in my chest. 2 sperm whales emerged from the shadows, scanning us to see if we were a threat. Within just a few feet of the mother, the click patterns changed, becoming slower, softer. They sounded to me like the sounds sperm whales use to identify themselves to others in the pod. The whales were probably introducing themselves. They were saying hello. Now, one thing I should add about these codes and these codas and these click patterns is that they are saying hello. They announce themselves as individuals. They announce what family they're from, and they announce what clan they are from. Different families that are within the same clan can socialize together and can travel together. But if the message that they're getting is that another clan is nearby, they avoid other clans. And that's because of all that stuff I said at the beginning about how your culture lets you know how to cooperate, what you're going to do, gives you expectations. And that means that if you're going to play it safe, it's better to just stick with who you know and what you know. Okay, so thanks very much.
Thank you. I put myself on mute because there's like a million guinea hens and pheasants and it's really loud. So how do you see that piece helping us? Like how, with culture and clans and individual, I love the fact that they have, I remember reading one part that even though they have their groups, they have a very strong, they have individuals, and each individual is supported in their individuality within a group or within a clan or within a group. And I thought that was really incredible because we aren't taught that. We aren't taught to be individuals. We're taught to stay the course and be what is expected of us, and I love that part. But with the whale culture, how do you see that helping us in our cultures? How do you see the differences in like I was reading about how there's one species of whales that are over 20 million years old. And I read that and I thought, we're like, the human race is 200,000 years old, not even close to a million, and 6,000 for civilization. And we're almost facing extinction. Like, or there's a possibility.
We're causing an extinction on Earth.
Exactly. And that's how can we educate ourselves to be more like, what can we learn from them? I guess that's what I'm asking you. What can we learn from that cultural piece that we're missing?
Well, I think there are two sides to the coin of that question. One is that in one sense we are able to learn a lot that's really important, but in another, and I'll get to that, but in another sense, the idea is not to use them to learn more about us. It's to learn about them, to learn who we are here with on this planet. We, in the 20th century, not in the time of Herman Melville and sailing ships, in the time of petroleum-driven ships with big engines, we killed millions of whales. Whales don't kill people, but people have killed millions of whales. They came very close to emptying the ocean of whales, and part of that was just a general savagery, viciousness on the part of people who assign no value to life unless they can somehow use it. And the other part of it was a total ignorance about who these creatures are as beings who value each other in their families and who value life and who belong in the world as much as we do and who've been here longer than we have been. So a big part of why I'm writing all this stuff is for us to learn about them. But of course, there are big lessons to learn about ourselves, about the arbitrariness of our values, about how we learn culture. We could easily learn another kind of culture. We could learn cultures of compassion. Cultures are taught. They're learned from our social group. We can either spread hatred, or we can spread lack of compassion, or we can spread caring and empathy and compassion for the rest of the living world around us, for the other people around us, for the other cultures around us. That's what we can learn from all of this to help us in our culture.
So just being open enough to I think I see what you're saying. Like, rather than just going and looking at nature and what we can learn from nature, it's almost like if we can learn, or not even, or almost incorporate culture, or understand their culture, or understand them as a living being, and how they, I don't know. I feel like there's a piece of me that I've always felt like we're separate, right? Like we walk out and we're in awe of beauty, but we don't feel really part of it. We feel separated from it, even if we're individuals in a big part.
Well, you wouldn't feel that way if you grew up the way humans lived for all of the 200,000 years you mentioned, except for about the last 5,000, because most human groups felt very much part of the rest of the world. They understood their extremely direct, not only connection to it, that in itself is a distancing kind of word, but they were completely immersed in it. They had tremendous senses of reverence and awe and respect for the power and the mystery of the world around them. We, in our culture, we grow up essentially totally divorced from the world. Most people have no idea where the water that comes out of their faucet came from. Many people don't know where the water goes when you flush the toilet. Most people have no idea where their food comes from when they go to the store and buy it. We're not too different from our dogs in that regard. You know, the dogs see us open a bag of dog food and they just eat it. We go and we open a box of whatever we just bought and we just eat it. We have no idea where it comes from. Most of us have no idea where the electricity we use was generated. We don't know anything about who we are, where we are, or what we're doing most of the time, and we don't even realize that we don't know it, because we blunder through life failing to ask any question about who we are and where we are and who we are with on earth, and where we came from and who we came from.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot in your book about like culture with wisdom, like the enmeshment of culture and wisdom, or maybe it's just wisdom. There's the piece, I don't know, are you reading anymore? Because there's that piece that I thought was so amazing with the drought and certain elephant groups that were able to
I'll read that. I'll bring that up and read that. When a devastating drought hit East Africa in 2009, hundreds of elephants died. Survival was much higher in families who had a matriarch old enough to remember how her family had survived the previous severe drought more than 20 years earlier and led her family to remaining water. Of 58 elephant families in Kenya's Amboseli region, one family lost 20 members, while the KA family did not lose anybody. The KAs were led by two big females, Kerry and Kyra, who were 40 and 39 years old when the drought hit. Old enough for wisdom, as the legendary researcher Cynthia Moss described them to me. The KAs spend a lot of time north of the park. It's not particularly safe, Moss says of that area. However, they're obviously doing something right, and I would attribute that to the knowledge of those two old females. In fact, between 2005 and 2019, a span of 14 years, they lost only one baby. Truly amazing, she says. Like sperm whales, elephants live in families where age and experience matter and learn from their elders where to go when a crisis strikes. Without receiving knowledge from older keepers of knowledge, they would die. That is culture.
Yeah, that really struck a chord with me, because I feel really blessed that I was able to do that with my mom. And I remember feeling when she died that there was a lot of wisdom that left with her. But then I realized that it, you know, because I was able to stay with her until my age, I feel like I learned a lot from her. But I wonder how, and I think it's so incredibly important. Well, my question is, how can we do that now? Because we live in an age where elders aren't important anymore. They don't know how to use iPhones. They're not technically savvy. We often, not everybody, but we often take them and remove them because, you know, and they aren't in a bracket where they're making as much money, spending as much money. I think we've kind of veered off into that section of you know, their importance. We don't look at their importance of what they can teach us from what you said, like what works, what doesn't work, what's poisonous, what's not poisonous, like that basic understanding of even love, right? Like even love, and I don't hear a lot of kids saying to me, oh, I learned a lot from my Nana, or I've learned a lot, my Nana taught me this, or I think it's such an important thing that we're losing it fast.
Yes, well, you know, that's what I said. Culture is really, the purpose of culture really is to pass on the knowledge of how we live here where we're living. But our culture changes at an accelerating rate, so that, you know, most people who are older don't have a lot to teach people who are younger about their culture. And you know, they may have a lot of wisdom about the world or about life or about the culture that they grew up in, but we have tempted everyone's attention away by turning people, you know, we call it a consumer culture. We just turn them into what's called consumers. They're not really, you know, and we used to call places lands. We used to say, you know, the lands of this people, and then we changed that into nations. Boundaries came up, and these boundaries established nations. Now we don't even bother to call them nations anymore. We call them economies. Listen to stories on the radio and it says, you know, the world's second largest economy. Well, what a ridiculous thing. First of all, the economy is totally globalized, so that's a total misstatement of anything. The fact that they make lots of money is not the defining aspect of a place or its people, but we've made it the defining thing because we have simplified the world away from our own humanity and really degraded ourselves to be just consumers, which means we're not even important unless we, you know, unless we have the tube stuck in our mouth and they're force feeding us what they have to sell us. It's you know, it follows directly from that there are a lot of people who are very confused about their place in the world, or the meaning of life, or that we don't value our elder family members, that young and old people cannot have a respectful or well-informed conversation much of the time. That we have all of these broken problems because we've broken all of these connections and all of this continuity.
So do you feel like when I was reading the book and I was saying that I felt really hopeful, maybe they're not teaching us, but my understanding when I read it, how it affects me is that it's like they open something up in me, right? Something up in
Well,
me.
they bloody well should.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they didn't, you could take the book and drop it into the garbage, because that's the whole point.
Yeah. So we're not necessarily, they're not teaching us, but in a way, when we understand them, as their being, or as their individuality as a species or a culture, it almost like I believe that we still have that inherentness in us. I believe that we still have that inherent part of us that loves and has compassion and wisdom. And
well, that's a culture we could learn, and you are, in a sense, you're feeling enough pain from the way you were brought up in the culture you were brought up, that you're trying to reimagine a culture to belong to, a more open one that values compassion and empathy and inclusiveness for people and nature more than the way culture was explained to you, because your culture hasn't really served your psyche and your emotional needs very well.
mm-hmm.
And that's why many of us are in a lot of pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was sort of my first question, is that I was very lucky. I was raised in the country, and I was raised with a mother that had lots of culture, and lots, like, historical ancestral culture, but also a really deep respect for nature, like massively deep respect for nature. And I think I was telling you that she didn't have a violent bone in her body, but was very clear with us. Like, I was young and I was collecting ladybugs, and because I was collecting them and putting them together, what I was doing, not knowing, I wasn't being very nice to them. And because I was putting them in this jar and whatever. And my mom knew that I would rather live outside than be inside, and never wanted to be in the house. And she brought me in, and she explained to me that, when I'm outside, I share that outsideness with everything, including ladybugs. And until I sort of understood that, I wasn't allowed to go out, not in a bad way, but she really, really made us understand that we share, we aren't separate. But I think as I age, and when I'm just in the world in general, and when I'm around natural medicine, and when I say when I read that, I have hope, because I do believe that we innately still, a lot of us are looking for that. And I'm going to say us, because I know that I know a lot of people are looking for that connection, looking for that empathy, looking for that wisdom, looking for that feeling that I get when I read the book. Like, I get that it's like it turns on a little light.
Mm-hmm.
So is there like, with your center, or ways of, like, for all of us that spoke today, we're all educators. We all lecture, we try to educate, species, looking at things more species oriented, and looking at, a kinder, more empathetic way. And I feel like we all do that with our dogs and our cats and our horses, but we kind of don't, we've kind of excluded the rest of the mammals, and the rest of the birds, and the rest of all the other species that we're with. So is there, like, is there an educational piece that people can go and learn and understand the synergistic way that we could be living, or that other things in the world are living? Like, they're living like that around us all the time. And is there a way that we can learn that, or?
Well, there are probably thousands of ways that you can learn it. I'm, and my mind is ranging everywhere from put a bird feeder outside your kitchen window so you can watch the birds while you're cleaning your dishes, which we do, to get a PhD in ecology and animal behavior, like I did, and everything in between. But for me, just I mean, I've spent a lot of my life thinking about and being with and studying wild animals, and in some very, very, very far-flung places on Earth. But I don't think you have to go far at all to experience everything that we're talking about. It's just a matter of scaling. So I live in a suburban place on Long Island, New York. Our area is, we live in a pretty nice neighborhood. There's some patches of woods and a couple of parks, but for the most part, it's one house right after another, right after another, right after another, with a suburban backyard. And yet, when we sit outside and we listen to all the different kinds of birds, you can tune in on what species of birds are there, what little mammals are there that, you know, come to the bird feeder, which birds have what territory at what side of the yard. Recently, we've been watching a pair of screech owls raising, and actually they fledged their young about a week ago. We go and watch them every night as they start to get active, and I've been getting up before dawn. A couple of nights I slept outside to kind of keep track of their calls. It's not much less or much different than being somewhere far away doing a similar thing with what you think of as more exotic animals. But I mean, exotic only means it's not where you live. Where you live is as exotic as any place to people who don't live there. And some of us don't live in places where there's much nature left. But even when I was a small boy in New York City, I was kind of tuned into the alley cats and to the pigeons and things like that. And I have to say that they all feel like my neighbors. And I don't mean that as a kind of an exaggeration or anything. They feel like my neighbors. My actual human neighbors feel, some of them feel like neighbors. Some of them I don't understand them at all, or I've never talked to people who live 3 houses down, you know. But I know these owls in my yard very, very well. And a friend of mine once said to me that he really wanted his kids to grow up loving nature, so they were thinking about going on safari in Botswana. And I said, well, Botswana is going to have very little to do with your children's actual life. It's going to be a place you go into and then come out of. Why don't you just get a couple of bird feeders and get to learn about how you really are sitting saturated in a natural living world that you really have made almost no acquaintance with yet, and how lovely that is. So I think there's plenty of opportunity, and a lot of it is simple, and a lot of it is very, very accessible. There's no end of what you can then delve into. I mean, there's incredible nature documentaries. If you want to see details of animals in other places, there's great books. There are books that I write. There are. I mean, you know, my office right now has piles on the floor of probably 150 books that have come in much faster than I can even look at them, and they're all on topics of great interest. So there's literally an endless amount of stuff and various totally different ways of approaching it, from very immediate hyper local approach to, you know, zooming out and watching films and reading books, and all of those things will enrich your local experience also.
Mm-hmm. And I think it just enriches us, period, you know, especially with COVID. And I'm really glad you said that, because it's, you know, when people are locked in and they can't get out, and it's such a prime time to even learn, like you said, what's around us, like alley cats and pigeons and things that are, people don't even know are around, or never really thought of them, like I'm sharing my world with this pigeon, or I'm sharing my world with this cat, this alley cat, or this feral cat. I think by doing that, and maybe it's just the way you've written too, is that the consciousness of detail brings us back into a moment, rather than whatever, being on a computer or a game or whatever, where we're not being conscious of a living thing. Just being conscious of a living thing, I think, really brings us back into our center, our more natural part of our brain that looks at something with interest, rather than looking at something from what we can gain from it. Like what is it going, how is it going to best serve us, rather than, wow, I want to learn about that. I want to learn about that because it lives right outside my door. Who knew?
Well, why do you have those orchids behind you? You because they're beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're really talking about. All these things we're talking about makes the world beautiful. And the more we know about them, and the more forget about know about them, the more we simply experience them, the more beautiful our life is, the more beautiful the world is. And I think that's really, in a way, the most important thing. Just subtract beauty from your life and look at what's left. A very grim endeavor to just get enough food and have a shelter. That's what's left if you subtract beauty. And so what I often say is that beauty is what makes life worth the time and effort it takes. And if we continue to assault all the beauty around us so that more people can sell more stuff to each other and distract each other for their time, we really diminish the amount of beauty in the world and in our own lives.
Just before, I agree with you 1,000,000%. And it's one of the reasons that I had that one quote from you, or that one piece. Can you just, to sort of the last, unless you have something else you want to read, it's the one about songs. Why does so much that is not intended for us? I read that, and I never really thought about it. As much as I love animals and as much as I feel a connection, I never thought about it like that.
Okay, this is a really quick one here. We're talking about birds and the beauty of birds in the section on, the section that's built around scarlet macaws. It's about a lot more than that, really, but it's anchored in the macaws, those huge parrots that are they're colored like tropical fruit punch, and several species of them live in the New World from Central America throughout South America. I visited them in the Amazon rainforest in Peru. So in discussing why they look the way they do, where almost all of the parrots in the New World are green, camouflaged, but these huge ones are these bright flaming colors, why would birds evolve such beauty? The human in me wonders, do birds see beauty in their plumage and hear it in their songs? Why does so much that is not intended for us seem so beautiful to us? Surely birdsong not intended for our ears, a lure that is none of our business, cannot seem beautiful to us alone. And if the perception of beauty is shared, well, can it be true that for all creatures the whole world brims with beauty? Can it not be? Thank you.
Thank you. That does sum it up for me, because I feel like it's all around us. It's everywhere. And I think my hope for this, one of my hopes for this event, is that we look at nature as beauty in, like it doesn't cost us anything to look at it. Doesn't cost us anything to hear a bird. It doesn't, there's simple things that are created that we can all share, like humans, birds, whatever. So,
well, we're supposed to be hearing them all the time, every day. That's the world we came into, was full of singing birds and other beautiful things. We just, I mean, in the Abrahamic tradition, the creation story, simplified as it is that we showed up in this incredible garden full of beauty and all of the rest of creation, which is exactly what happened. It may not be exactly how it happened, but it's exactly what happened. That's the way it's supposed to be. If anybody has a much of a right to anything, it's that we're supposed to live in a world that is absolutely bursting with beauty.
and that's a perfect thing to even end this with, because it is it's what I wanted to try and let everybody know, right? When we pick up a bottle of essential lavender oil, what did this look like, right? What did this look like before it came into the bottle? What let's learn about it. What's its culture? Not that we have to be connected to it or we learn from it, but if we're using it, I think it would hold a lot of weight for us to understand it as what it is.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that even though we say that we're natural, or we're moving on that path, I still feel like we're disconnected. And I really wanted you to come on, and this whole event is about connecting, supporting, loving, understanding, helping us move through a difficult time. And I feel like that's a part that is a little bit missing in this world of natural medicine, is the respect and understanding for what we're using.
Yeah, well, that world is not my expertise, but I think that my feeling about food applies to what you're saying. And I often say that it's a good meal if there's a story that you have that comes with it. So, if you got something from your garden, or you got it from somebody who raised it, or you went, in my case, I live near the coast, and we dig clams, and sometimes we catch fish, and we have a tremendous amount of respect for the meal that we're eating, and for the fact that we're sustaining ourselves in ways that we understand a little bit better than if we just got it across a counter. And we have a story about where we went, who we got it from, what we did, how we raised it, or things along those lines. So I think that, to me, that's a good way of checking if I'm having a good meal, or if we're having good food. It's because we have we can tell if we have a story that goes with it.
Wow, that's amazing. It's another thing I think that we're losing a little bit in our lives too, is storytelling. I could listen to people telling stories and old stories and reading books and stuff for forever. So it's 5:28 or 5:28 my time, 4:28. And I want to thank you so much. I'm just so honored to have you here. And I highly recommend that everybody that's watching this at least gets that one book and starts to read it. And then I think they'll understand where I'm coming from about it it opening a place that I think we all have, and the potential that we all have to be kinder, to be more understanding, to be more loving, to be more respectful to the world and to the people in every species that is around us.
Hopefully so. Hopefully so. Since the main theme about this is connection, I actually wrote a book about 4 books ago that is explicitly about connecting with the rest of the world and with the rest of each other. And that book is called The View from Lazy Point.
Okay.
Subtitle is A Natural Year in an Unnatural World. And that one is exactly about connectivity.
Okay, we'll share that on our chat for sure, so that everybody can.
Wonderful. I think people who are at all interested in me and that word connectivity, it would be good to take a look at that. And you know, you don't have to go buy the book first. It was reviewed in the New York Times Book Review. You can look at the review first before you decide if you want to go out and actually get the book. But I want to thank you also. It's been a tremendous honor to be on with you. It's been a lot of fun to be on with you.
Thank you.
And I enormously appreciate your interest in what I have to say. So thank you.
Well, I do, very, very much so. And I thank you, and I thank all the speakers and 4,500 people that have been tuning in, and just the whole energy, and everybody's just volunteered their time, and it's a really good empirical sample or a proof of our desire to help, and our desire to support each other and connect with each other.
Yeah, great.
Thank you so much, Carl.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you very, very much. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
And make sure we get the link on the recording so we can.
I will. Absolutely.